I spent 5 years building a life with Henry and 10 years paying off the mortgage on my dream Victorian home. We were 7 days away from the altar when he dropped the mask. He didn't want a marriage, he wanted a deed transfer to his parents. When I refused, he threatened to cancel everything. So I let him cancel it, and then I ruined him. The silence in our living room was heavy enough to crush bone. It was 11:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, exactly 1 week before I was supposed to walk down the aisle in a silk organza gown that had cost me 3 months of overtime shifts at the pharmacy. The only light came from the street lamps filtering through the bay window. I had restored myself, casting long, prison bar shadows across the hardwood floor. Henry sat on the edge of the velvet armchair, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. He looked perfect, as he always did, hair gelled even at this hour, his tailored suit jacket draped meticulously over the sofa arm. He sold luxury cars for a living, and he wore that persona like a second skin, polished, expensive, and convincing. "It's just a gesture, Serenity," he said, his voice smooth, devoid of the jagged edge that had been there only moments before. "It's about trust. It's about proving that you're marrying me for the family, not just keeping your separate assets." I stared at him, my mug of chamomile tea turning cold in my hands. The request had come out of nowhere, sandwiched between a discussion about the floral arrangements and the seating chart. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "You want me to sign the deed of this house, the house I bought 3 years before I met you, the house I renovated with my own hands, over to your parents, as a wedding gift?" Henry sighed, the sound of a patient parent explaining simple math to a toddler. "Not give it to them, Wren. It's a transfer of title to the family trust. It's how the Hawthornes handle assets. My parents, Brenda and Carl, they just want to ensure that everything stays within the family lineage. Ideally, we transfer the deed to them, they hold it in the trust, and we live here rent-free. It protects us from liability." "I am the family lineage," I countered. "My name is on the mortgage. My name is on the deed. I have zero liability issues because I pay my bills, Henry. Why would I sign my largest asset over to your parents?" He stood up then, pacing the length of the rug. "Because if you don't, they won't feel comfortable with the union. They think you're holding back. They think you don't trust me." He stopped and turned, his blue eyes turning icy. "Look, Serenity, put the house in their name by Friday, or there's no wedding. I can't marry someone who doesn't value family unity." The ultimatum hung in the air, smelling of ozone and disaster. I looked around the room. I remembered stripping the 7 layers of wallpaper off these walls. I remembered sanding these floors until my shoulders screamed. I remembered the day I made the final payment, the sheer elation of owning my sanctuary outright. I was a 34-year-old clinical pharmacist. I dealt in precision, in dosage, in cause and effect. And the cause and effect here didn't make sense. "You're threatening to cancel the wedding," I whispered, "over a house deed." "I'm postponing a mistake," he corrected, checking his watch, a Rolex I knew was a replica. "Think about it, prove you love me. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, can draft the transfer tomorrow. It's just paper, Wren, don't be selfish." He walked out of the room and into the guest bedroom, closing the door with a finality that felt like a gavel strike. I sat there in the dark, the selfish accusations stinging my eyes, but beneath the hurt, something else was waking up. A cold, clinical suspicion. It wasn't just paper, it was my life, and Henry had just shown me exactly how much he thought it was worth. The next morning, the sky was a bruised purple, heavy with a coming storm. I hadn't slept. I had spent the night staring at the ceiling, replaying the last 5 years of my life. Henry had always been flashy with money, insisting on the best restaurants and the newest clothes, but he was always vague about his savings. "Commissions are lumpy," he'd say. I had let it slide because I was independent. I didn't need his money. But now, it seemed he needed mine. At 12:30 p.m., I met Brenda and Carl for lunch. Henry had insisted. "Clear the air," he had texted me from work. "Show them you're a team player." They chose El Ortolan, the most expensive French bistro in the city. Brenda was already seated when I arrived, wearing a buckle jacket that screamed Chanel but whispered eBay knockoff if you looked at the stitching too closely. Carl was next to her, looking like a melted candle in a linen suit, scrolling through his phone with aggressive jabs. "Serenity, darling," Brenda exclaimed, not standing up. "To greet me, you look tired, wedding stress." "Something like that," I said, sliding into the booth. I ordered an iced tea. They had already ordered a bottle of Dom Perignon. "Henry tells us you're having some?" "Hesitation about the Hawthorne family trust," Carl said, not looking up from his phone. "Disappointing. We thought you were a modern woman who understood legacy." "I understand property law," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I'm struggling to understand why my house needs to be in your names for Henry and me to get married." Brenda laughed, a tinkling, brittle sound. She reached across the table and patted my hand. Her rings were large, gaudy, and loose on her fingers. "Oh, sweetie, you're looking at this like a transaction. It's a merging of souls. Henry is going to be a very wealthy man one day. We have investments maturing, overseas accounts. This house of yours is a lovely little cottage, but it's peanuts compared to what you'll inherit from us. We just need the deed transferred to balance the initial portfolio weight for the tax season. It's a temporary formality." "If it's temporary," I asked, "can we sign a contract stating it reverts to me in 6 months?" The temperature at the table dropped 10 degrees. Carl finally looked up. His eyes were watery and bloodshot. "We don't do contracts with family, Serenity. It's insulting. If you sign the house over, it shows good faith. If you don't," he shrugged, pouring himself another glass of champagne, "then perhaps Henry is right. Perhaps you aren't ready for the level of lifestyle we operate in." "The wedding is in 6 days," Brenda added, buttering a roll with violent force. "We have guests flying in from the Hamptons. Imagine the embarrassment if we have to cancel because the bride was greedy." Greedy? The word bounced around my skull. I looked at Brenda, at her frantic, twitchy energy. I looked at Carl, who was sweating despite the air conditioning. These weren't the relaxed, wealthy matriarch and patriarch of a dynasty. They looked like cornered animals trying to pose as lions. "I need to check with my lawyer," I lied. "Mr. Henderson, just to make sure the tax implications don't hurt you." "No lawyers," Brenda snapped, too quickly. She composed herself instantly, smoothing her napkin. "I mean, why bring in outsiders? Henry has a notary friend who can handle the signature tonight. Keep it simple. Keep it in the family." My stomach churned. This wasn't a wedding gift. This was a shakedown. I drove home in a daze, the radio off. The silence of the car amplified the chaos in my mind. Keep it in the family. No lawyers. Temporary formality. It all sounded like a script they had rehearsed 1,000 times. When I got home, Henry wasn't there yet. I walked through my house, touching the walls, the wainscoting I had installed, the vintage light fixtures I had sourced from estate sales. This place was my safety net, my retirement plan, my sanctuary. I went into Henry's home office, a small guest room he had claimed for his administrative work. I rarely went in there. I respected his privacy. But today, privacy felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. The desk was messy, covered in brochures for luxury yachts and high-end watches. Typical Henry. But under a stack of car and driver magazines, I found a letter. It wasn't even opened yet. It was addressed to Brenda and Carl Hawthorne, but it had been mailed here, care of Henry. It was from a collection agency. Urgent final notice. I didn't open it. I didn't need to commit a felony to know what a red envelope meant. I put it back exactly as I found it. At 2:15 a.m., I woke up to the sound of a voice. I lay still in bed. Henry wasn't beside me. The balcony door was slightly ajar, the curtains fluttering in the night breeze. I could hear him pacing outside, his voice a harsh whisper. "I'm trying, Mom. She's stubborn. No, I can't just forge it, it needs a notary. Yes, I know about the deadline. I know who they are. Look, if she doesn't sign by Friday, we're dead anyway, so just let me work her." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Dead anyway. I told you, Henry hissed, his voice rising in panic. The equity is there. The appraisal came in at 800,000. That covers the bridge loan and the VIG. Yes, I promise. Just keep them off my back for 2 more days. He hung up and leaned heavily against the railing. I saw his silhouette through the sheer curtains. He looked defeated, terrified, and dangerous. He wasn't marrying me, he was harvesting me. I realized then that the wealthy Hawthorne family was a mirage. They weren't trying to secure my asset for a trust. They were drowning, and they saw my house as the only life raft big enough to save them all. I quietly slid out of bed, grabbed my phone, and went into the bathroom. I locked the door and turned on the shower to mask the sound. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call the police. I opened my contacts and scrolled down to J. Jeremiah. We hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since I wished him happy birthday. But 15 years ago, when he was a homeless teenager accused of theft, I was the only one who stood up for him. I gave him a key to my parents' garage and a laptop to finish his GED. He was now an investigative journalist who specialized in exposing financial fraud. I sent a single text: I need to cash in the favor. I think I'm the mark in a long con. 3 dots appeared instantly. Name and time, he replied. Henry Hawthorne, now. The wedding was off, but the war had just begun. Jeremiah met me at a 24-hour diner on the edge of the city at 4:30 a.m. It was neutral ground, far away from the upscale bistros Brenda and Carl favored. He looked different than the skinny kid I'd sheltered in a garage. He was broader now, wearing a worn leather jacket and glasses that caught the glare of the neon sign. He had a laptop open before I even sat down. Coffee, he said, sliding a mug toward me. Black, you look like you need it. I feel like I'm hallucinating, I admitted, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic. Tell me I'm crazy, Jem. Tell me I'm just a paranoid bride getting cold feet. He didn't smile. He turned his laptop around. You're not crazy, Serenity, you're lucky. On the screen was a dossier. It was a spiderweb of shell companies, lawsuits, and debt judgments. At the center were 3 names: Henry, Brenda, and Carl Hawthorne. They aren't old money, Jeremiah explained, pointing to a graph that looked like a descending staircase into hell. They're professional deadbeats. Brenda and Carl filed for bankruptcy in 2018, 2021, and again last year under a different LLC. They survive by maxing out credit lines, defaulting, and moving to a new state before the servers catch up. But this, he tapped a specific document. This is new. It was a loan agreement from a private lending firm called Apex Capital. Apex isn't a bank, Jeremiah said quietly. They're hard money lenders. Predatory. They lend to people who can't get money anywhere else, usually at 40% interest. And they don't sue you when you don't pay. They send guys who break kneecaps. I felt the blood drain from my face. How much do they owe? Collectively, about 600,000, and it's due next week. Specifically, the Tuesday after your wedding. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud: the rush to get married, the insistence on the deed transfer, the family trust. They need my house, I whispered. It's worth 800. They want to flip it to pay off the loan sharks. Worse, Jeremiah said. He clicked another tab. They've already leveraged it. I stared at the screen. It was a notice of intent to lien. How? My name is on the deed. They forged a letter of intent, Jeremiah said. They showed Apex a document claiming the property transfer was in progress, signed by you. It bought them a 30-day extension. That extension ends on Tuesday. If they don't hand over the actual deed by then, Apex seizes their collateral, which right now is nothing, so Apex will come for them. I sat back, nausea rolling over me. So if I don't sign, they get hurt. Jeremiah looked at me over his glasses. Serenity. These people were going to leave you homeless. They were going to take the one thing you spent your life building, hand it to criminals, and leave you to deal with the foreclosure. They didn't just want your house. They were willing to destroy your life to save their own skins. He was right. The man I loved, the man I cooked dinner for, had looked me in the eye and demanded my home, knowing full well he was throwing me to the wolves. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice hardening. Jeremiah cracked his knuckles. "You have two options: run, change the locks, and call the cops. Or," he smirked, a dangerous glint in his eye, "we let them think they won, we let them dig the hole a little deeper, and then we bury them in it." "I choose option 2, I said. The plan required precision. I had to play the part of the submissive, confused bride-to-be while Jeremiah built the trap. I went home at 6:00 a.m., slipping into bed just as the sun was coming up. When Henry woke up an hour later, I was already in the kitchen, making pancakes. "Morning," I said, forcing a smile. I thought about what you said." Henry froze, a fork halfway to his mouth. And you're right," I lied. "It's about trust. I don't want to start our marriage fighting over assets. I'll sign the house over." The relief that washed over his face was disgusting. It wasn't the relief of a lover. It was the relief of a junkie getting a fix. He rushed over and hugged me, burying his face in my neck. "Oh, Ren, you won't regret this, I promise. Mom and Dad will be so happy. This saves everything." "There's just one thing," I said, pulling back Slig. "HTLY? I want to do it properly. You said no lawyers, and I respect that, but I need some kind of record for my own peace of mind. Just a formal handover ceremony. We can do it at the rehearsal dinner. Sign the papers in front of everyone. A show of unity." Henry hesitated. "In front of everyone?" "Yes," I insisted. "If we're merging families, let's do it proudly. I'll bring the deed, you bring the notary. We sign it right before the toasts." He smiled, his vanity winning over his caution. "That's actually brilliant. A public gesture. Mom will love the optics." While Henry went to work, or wherever he went to pretend to work, I went to see Mr. Henderson, my lawyer. Mr. Henderson was a man of few words and many leather-bound books. When I explained the situation, he didn't gasp. He just took off his glasses and polished them slowly. "You want me to draft a deed transfer," he clarified. "That looks legal but is functionally void." "Exactly," I said. "I want a document that, to the untrained eye, looks like I'm signing over the property to the Hawthorne family trust. But I want a clause in the fine print, buried in legalese, that renders the transfer null and void unless a specific countersignature from an independent auditor is present. An auditor who doesn't exist." "A poison pill clause," Henderson nodded. "Risky. If they have a competent lawyer, they'll spot it." "They don't have a lawyer," I said, thinking of Brenda's eBay Chanel. "They have a notary friend and a deadline. They're desperate. They won't read it." "And the real deed stays in your vault," I said, "along with a restraining order against all three of them, to be served the moment the wedding is called off." Henderson smiled, a rare, shark-like expression. "I'll have it ready by noon." By the time I left his office, Jeremiah had sent me the second part of the plan. He had tracked down the contact for Apex Capital. "I'm going to send an anonymous tip to the lender," Jeremiah texted, "letting them know that the property transfer is happening Friday night. They'll be watching. If the Hawthorns try to pull anything, Apex will know immediately." The stage was set. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted, a show. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of fake smiles and internal screaming. Brenda and Carl were suddenly sickly sweet. They sent flowers. They called me daughter. It made my skin crawl. On Thursday, 2 days before the wedding, I came home to find a "for sale" sign in my recycling bin. They had brought it over, likely planning to plant it in the yard the second the ink was dry on Friday night. They weren't even waiting for the honeymoon. I sat on my porch, the very porch they planned to steal, and called Scarlett my sister. "You're doing what?" she screeched. "Serenity, are you out of your mind? You're going through with the rehearsal." "I have to," I said, watching the sunset. "If I back out now, they vanish. They run to another state and do this to someone else. I need to expose them, publicly, and I need to make sure they can never come after me again." I'm bringing a taser, Scarlett said flatly. To the dinner, just in case. Bring popcorn, I replied. You're going to need it. That night, Henry came home with a bottle of champagne. He was giddy. I spoke to the notary, he said, pouring 2 glasses. He's coming to the bistro tomorrow night. It's all set. Great, I said, taking a sip. It tasted like ash. Did you tell your parents? Oh, they're thrilled. Dad actually cried. I bet he did. Tears of relief that his kneecaps were staying intact. Henry, I asked, looking him dead in the eye, do you love me? He didn't blink. More than anything, Wren, why? Just checking. He didn't love me. He loved the house. He loved the lifeline I represented. And that realization killed the last tiny shred of guilt I had about what I was about to do. I went to my closet and pulled out the dress I was going to wear to the rehearsal dinner. It was red, blood red, a warrior's color. Jeremiah texted me one last time before bed. The trap is primed. Apex knows the transfer is happening. They are expecting the deed to be faxed to them by midnight Friday. If they don't get a valid deed, well. They won't get a valid deed, I typed back. They're getting a souvenir. I went to sleep peacefully for the first time in a week. Tomorrow, the Hawthornes were going to learn the most expensive lesson of their lives. Never underestimate a woman who reads the fine print. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Gilded Lily, a private room in an upscale steakhouse that smelled of aged mahogany and old money. Brenda and Carl had insisted on it, putting it on a credit card I knew would bounce by Monday. The room was filled with about 30 people, mostly Henry's extended family and a few of our mutual friends. My side was sparse. Just Scarlett, looking ready to flip a table, and a few of my colleagues from the FA. RMSE. I wore the red dress. It felt like armor. Brenda was holding court at the head of the table, wearing a sequined gown that was entirely inappropriate for a rehearsal dinner. She looked manic, her eyes darting to the door every few minutes. Carl was sweating through his suit, drinking scotch like it was water. Serenity, Brenda shrieked when I walked in. The bride, the star of the show. She rushed over and kissed my cheek. She smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. Did you bring it? She whispered, her grip on my arm painful. It's in my bag, I said, smiling sweetly. The deed and the transfer papers. She let out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. Good girl. The notary is setting up at the small table in the corner. We'll do it right after the appetizers. I took my seat next to Henry. He squeezed my knee under the table. You look beautiful, Wren. Thanks, I said. You look eager. The appetizers came and went, shrimp cocktails and tartare that tasted like impending doom. I barely ate. I watched them. I watched Brenda text furiously under the table. I watched Carl wipe his forehead with a napkin every 30 seconds. They were terrified. The deadline with Apex Capital must have been tighter than I thought. Then, clinking a spoon against his glass, Carl stood up. Family and friends, he boomed, his voice slightly slurred. We are gathered here to celebrate the union of my son, Henry, and his lovely fiancée, Serenity. But tonight, we celebrate more than a wedding. We celebrate the merging of assets, I mean families. A few people chuckled nervously. Serenity has graciously agreed to a traditional Hawthorne custom, Carl continued, gesturing to me. To show her commitment to the family trust, she is formally transferring the title of her beautiful home to the family estate, a symbol of unity. There was a polite smattering of applause. Scarlett didn't clap. She stared at Carl with the intensity of a sniper. So, Carl said, waving his hand toward the corner table where a nervous-looking man with a notary stamp sat. Let's make it official. I stood up. The room went quiet. I picked up my bag and walked to the notary table. Henry, Brenda, and Carl followed me like a pack of hyenas. I pulled out the folder Mr. Henderson had prepared. The papers were thick, creamy, official-looking. Here it is, I said, laying them out. Brenda practically vibrated. Just sign right there, sweetie, and here, and here. I picked up the pen. I looked at Henry. You're sure about this? This is what you want? "It's for us, babe," he said, his eyes glued to the paper. "Just sign." I signed. I signed my name with a flourish on 3 separate lines. The notary stamped them with a satisfying thud thud thud. "Done," Brenda crowed, snatching the papers before the ink was even dry. "Oh, wonderful. Welcome to the family, Serenity." She didn't hug me. She immediately handed the folder to Carl, who practically ran out of the room, phone in hand. He was going to fax them to Apex Capital. He was going to try and save his skin. I sat back down and took a sip of water. Enjoy it, I thought. It's the last victory lap you'll ever take. The dinner continued, the mood noticeably lighter on the Hawthorne side. They thought they were safe. They thought the wolf at the door had been fed. About 20 minutes later, Carl returned, looking 10 years younger. "Sent," he whispered to Brenda, loud enough for me to hear. "They accepted the transmission. We're clear." Brenda let out a laugh that was pure hysteria. She ordered another bottle of champagne. Then, the doors to the private room opened. 2 men walked in. They weren't waiters. They were wearing cheap suits that didn't fit, and they had the dead-eyed look of people who hurt others for a living. The room went silent. "Carl Hawthorne?" one of them asked. His voice was gravel. Carl stood up confused. "Yes, who are you?" "We're from Apex," the man said. He didn't shout, he didn't need to. "We got your fax." "Right," Carl said, puffing out his chest. "So we're good, the collateral is transferred, you have the deed." "We have a paper," the man said, stepping closer. "But our legal team just ran the deed number through the county database, and they read the fine print on your fax." Brenda stood up, her glass shaking. "What are you talking about?" The man held up a copy of the document I had just signed. "Clause 14, Section B, this transfer is contingent upon the immediate countersignature of a licensed independent auditor, specifically one Mr. I.P. Freely. Since no such auditor exists and no signature is present, this document is void." Someone in the back of the room, probably Scarlett, snorted loudly. "Void," Carl stammered, his face turning gray. No, that's a mistake. She signed it, it's notarized." "It's a dummy contract," the man said, dropping the papers on the table. It sounded like a gunshot. "You tried to pay us with monopoly money, Carl. And you know what the penalty for fraud is in our contract." The second man stepped forward. "The extension is revoked. The full amount is due, tonight." "Tonight?" Brenda shrieked. "We don't have $600,000. "Then we take assets," the man said. He looked around the room. "Nice watches, nice jewelry." "This is a private party," Henry yelled, trying to sound tough but looking like a frightened child. "Get out." The first man looked at Henry. "You're the son, Henry, you signed the guarantor papers too." Henry froze. I didn't think." "We're taking the cars outside," the man said calmly. "The Porsche, the Mercedes, keys now." Chaos erupted. Brenda started screaming. Carl looked like he was having a heart attack. The guests were murmuring, horrified. I stayed seated. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the steak. It was perfectly cooked. "Serenity," Henry turned to me, his eyes wild. "Do something, tell them the house is theirs." I wiped my mouth with a linen napkin. "I can't, Henry. I read the contract. I can't give away my assets to a criminal enterprise. It would be unethical." "You did this," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You set us up." "I protected myself," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "You tried to steal my home to pay your gambling debts. Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" The Apex men were already moving toward Carl. "Keys," the man repeated. Carl, trembling, reached into his pocket and handed over the keys to his leased Mercedes. "And yours," the man said to Henry. Henry looked at me, pleading. "Ren, please, they'll kill us." "You should have thought of that before you bet my house," I said cold. He handed over the keys. The wedding, obviously, did not happen. The fallout from the rehearsal dinner was swift and brutal. The Apex men took the cars. They took Brenda's Chanel bag, which they promptly threw back when they realized it was fake. They left with a promise to return on Monday for liquid assets. By Saturday morning, my wedding day, the story had spread through our social circle like wildfire. Did you hear? The Hawthornes are broke. Loan sharks crashed the rehearsal dinner. Serenity trapped them. My phone blew up with texts. Apologies from friends who had been fooled by Henry's charm. Shocked messages from relatives. I didn't answer any of them. I spent the morning in my garden, deadheading the roses. At noon, the time I was supposed to be walking down the aisle, I got a visitor. It was Henry. He looked like a ghost. He was unshaven, wearing the same clothes from the night before. He stood on the sidewalk. He didn't dare set foot on my property. "Ren," he called out. His voice was broken. I walked to the gate. I didn't open it. "Why?" he asked. "Why didn't you just tell me you knew? Why did you have to humiliate us like that?" "Because you didn't ask me for help, Henry," I said. "You demanded my submission. You tried to trick me. You were going to marry me, take my home, and leave me with nothing when your house of cards collapsed." "I loved you," he sobbed. "No," I said softly. "You loved the lifestyle you thought I could subside. You loved the idea of being rescued." "They're going to hurt us," he whispered. "Mom and Dad, they're talking about fleeing the country." "They should," I said, "because Jeremiah, you remember Jeremiah? He just published an article online about a local family running a Ponzi scheme and defrauding investors." Henry's eyes went wide. "It went live 10 minutes ago." I checked my watch. "The police are probably on their way to your parents' rental right now. Fraud, forgery, tax evasion. It's a long list, Henry." He stared at me, seeing me for the first time. Not as a prop, not as a mark, but as the architect of his destruction. "You're a monster," he spat. "I'm a pharmacist," I corrected. "I know that sometimes, to cure the disease, you have to cut out the rot." I turned my back on him and walked back to my house. My house, the one that was still mine and would always be mine. Behind me, I heard the sound of a siren approaching in the distance. The weeks following the wedding that wasn't were strangely quiet. It was the calm after a hurricane. The Hawthornes had vanished from the social scene, their fall from grace absolute. Jeremiah kept me updated. The article he published had triggered an avalanche. It turned out Brenda and Carl hadn't just borrowed from Apex. They had swindled a dozen local small business owners, promising high returns on non-existent real estate developments. My house was just supposed to be the final chip to pay off the most dangerous creditor. But the real shock came on a Tuesday afternoon, a month later. I received a registered letter. It wasn't from Henry, it was from the county clerk. Notice of foreclosure proceedings. My heart stopped. I owned my house, I had paid it off. I had the deed in a safe. I tore open the envelope. The document stated that a lien had been placed on my property by Apex Capital based on a pre-signed collateral agreement dated 3 months prior. My blood ran cold. 3 months ago. I called Mr. Henderson immediately. "They forged your signature on a preliminary agreement," Henderson explained, his voice grim. "Before they even asked you for the deed, they forged a document claiming you had agreed to put the house up as collateral for a loan Henry took out. They used that forgery to get the cash from Apex initially." "But it's fake," I yelled. "I never signed anything." "We know that," Henderson said, "but Apex doesn't care. They have a paper that says they own a stake in your home. They've filed for foreclosure to recoup their losses since the Hawthornes defaulted." I hung up, shaking. They were gone, Brenda, Carl, Henry, but they had left a landmine behind. Even from the ruins of their life, they were still trying to take mine. I drove to the courthouse the next morning. I had to file an emergency injunction to stop the sale. As I was filling out the paperwork, I saw a familiar name on the docket list. Brenda Hawthorne versus Carl Hawthorne. Divorce filings. And below that, State versus Henry Hawthorne. They hadn't fled the country, they had been caught. The court date to contest the foreclosure was set for 2 weeks later. I spent every waking hour gathering evidence. I pulled old bank records, handwriting samples, and emails. Jeremiah helped me track down the notary Henry had used for the forged document, a sleazy guy named Fast Eddie who operated out of a van. Jeremiah found him. Or rather, Jeremiah found the dashcam footage from a nearby ATM that showed Henry handing Eddie an envelope of cash on the date the forgery was signed. We had them. But I needed closure. I needed to see him one last time. I went to the county jail, where Henry was being held awaiting trial for fraud. He looked terrible. His hair was matted, his jumpsuit was too big, and the arrogance was completely gone. He looked small. "You came," he said, picking up the phone through the glass. "I need you to sign an affidavit," I said, sliding a paper into the slot for his lawyer to review. "Admitting that you forged my signature on the Apex loan document 3 months ago." He looked at the paper. "Why should I? It's my only leverage. Maybe I can trade it for a lighter sentence." "You don't have leverage, Henry," I said. "We have the video of you paying off the notary. We have the text messages Brenda sent you telling you to practice her signature. We have everything." He slumped against the metal stool. "If you sign this," I said, "I won't press charges for the identity theft. I'll let the state handle the fraud. It might save you 5 years." He picked up the pen. His hand shook. "I really did want to live there with you," he whispered. "It was a nice house." "It is a nice house," I corrected, "and it's mine." He signed. I took the paper and walked out. I didn't look back. As I stepped out into the sunlight, I felt a weight lift off my chest that I hadn't realized I was carrying. The bridge wasn't just burned, the ashes had washed away. I sat on my front porch, a glass of lemonade in my hand. The garden was in full bloom, hydrangeas bursting with blue and purple, the roses climbing the trellis I had repaired myself. The foreclosure suit had been dismissed with prejudice. The affidavit and the video evidence were enough to send Apex Capital scurrying back into the shadows. They didn't want a public trial exposing their predatory practices. Henry was sentenced to 8 years. Brenda and Carl got 10 each. Turns out, the federal government takes tax evasion very seriously. I took a sip of lemonade and looked at the "for sale" sign I had found in my recycling bin months ago. I had kept it as a trophy. I had painted over "for sale" and written "not for sale" in bright red letters. It hung in my garage. Scarlett pulled up in my driveway, honking the horn. She jumped out, holding a bottle of wine. "Happy not anniversary," she yelled. "Today would have been my 6-month wedding anniversary." "Best day of my life," I called back. We sat on the porch as the sun went down, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I looked at my house, solid, safe, and entirely mine. I realized I hadn't lost a fiancé. I had dodged a bullet. A very expensive, very destructive bullet.